There is an old rocking chair on the porch of the house, made of weathered wood and well polished by time. Sometimes, when the wind blows softly, I can hear the creaking of the wood, as if it were talking to the memories that live in my heart. My life today is calm and peaceful. I watch the grandchildren play, run around, feeling the joy of youth. But behind the smile I show, there is a story that is not easy to tell. A story that, in a way, shaped everything I am now. Sometimes, I look at the horizon and find myself thinking, if I had known what would come, would I have done it all the same way? Before I start, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing that my story is reaching different places. I remember very well the day my daughter told me she was pregnant. She was only 17, still a girl, with dreams and hopes that didn't include a child in her arms. I, who had already lived quite a bit, knew the weight that news would bring to our family. I remember her, lying on the sofa, looking at me with a lost look, not knowing how to say what she was about to reveal. She had always been so shy, her eyes always seeking approval. But that day, it seemed like the whole world was on top of her, and she didn't know how to escape. My daughter didn't want that baby. She didn't want the responsibility it would bring, and I understood her anguish. But there was something inside me that told me that child needed a home, and that home could be mine. I had already experienced what it was to be a mother, had already gone through the pain of childbirth, the joy of seeing a child grow, and the challenges of raising them. I knew what it was to be a mother, but I also knew that my daughter needed something that, at that moment, she couldn't give me. So, it was at that moment that everything changed. I hugged her, as only a mother can, and promised that, no matter what happened, the child would be well taken care of. I didn't know exactly what that meant, nor how it would be, but I knew that the baby needed a mother, and if my daughter couldn't be that mother, then I would be. She cried, of course. How could she not cry when standing at the brink of a great change in her life? I held her, ran my hands through her hair, and told her everything would be okay, but I knew, deep down, that words couldn't erase reality. The reality was that now she was pregnant, and her life would take a different turn. What I didn't know was that my life would also take a different path, and that child would be more than just a grandson. He would be my son, in a way that no one could understand. When the baby was born, my daughter was still so young, so immature for the responsibility of being a mother. I watched her trying to be careful, trying to do what was expected of her, but she was lost. She didn't have that natural, nurturing instinct that comes with becoming a mother. She loved the baby, I knew that, but she didn't know how to give him her best. And again, my role became clearer. I was there, not only to give support, but to assume a responsibility that wasn't mine. And at the same time, it was. I cared for the baby as if he were my son. I didn't care what people would think. He needed me. I needed him. Life was giving me a chance to raise a child again, but in a different way. I had already raised my daughter with love and with all the care in the world, but raising a grandson, who was actually my son, was a new experience, and in some ways, difficult. It was difficult because it wasn't just about loving him. I needed to protect, guide, and teach, in a way that, for me, seemed so natural, but for him, seemed like a great mystery. He looked at me with those curious eyes, and I saw in him the future, what he could become. I saw in those eyes, so full of uncertainty, a search for answers. How can a child know, so early on, that the world is more complex than one imagines? I didn't know, but I knew he trusted me. He trusted me to give him what life could not yet offer: protection, affection, and the unconditional love only a mother, or a grandmother pretending not to be, can give. And my daughter? She tried, of course, but at times it was as if she were playing at being a mother. She liked to care, to bathe him, but when difficulties arose, when the baby cried endlessly, she withdrew. And there I was, with the patience of someone who had already lived through it all, to give her what she needed. I never complained. I couldn't. I knew she wasn't ready to be the mother he needed, and if that meant I would have to be that mother, so be it. Time passed, and the baby grew. I saw him take his first steps, say his first words, go to school for the first time. And at each significant milestone in his life, I was there, by his side, as a mother, as a grandmother, as the woman who was not afraid to take on the responsibility that others could not or would not. When he started calling me Mom, not knowing the weight those words carried, my heart warmed. It was as if he knew, in some way, that I was more than a grandmother. I wasn't just a grandmother who loved him. I was the mother he had always needed, even though he didn't know it. For years, he was my son. I didn't talk about it to anyone. I didn't need to. He and I knew. I knew he needed me, and he knew I was there for him, forever. But not everything was so simple. At times, I caught myself thinking about my daughter, the pain she felt for not being able to be the mother he deserved, and that cut my heart. She was still my daughter, and I loved her. But as much as she tried, she didn't have the same bond with him that I did, and that in a way hurt. But life goes on, and the wounds heal. Today, he is a man, and still calls me Mom. He knows everything I did for him, and although the words were never spoken, I know he understands. I raised him as if he were my son because I knew that's what he needed. He, with time, understood me, and, with the gaze of someone who has walked a long way, said I was the best mother he could have had. This is the story I carry in my chest, the story that few know, but for me is the truest one. A story of love, sacrifice, and a bond that goes beyond what titles can define. The night my grandson was born was hot and suffocating, the kind where the sky feels heavy above your head. The electricity kept going out at our house, and the candle flickered on the hallway table as if it knew that something far greater than it was about to happen. Time felt suspended. I still remember the smell of soapstone, the water boiling on the wood stove, and the sound of the kettle humming softly, like a prayer. My daughter, poor thing, was in the bedroom, moaning softly, gripping the edge of the mattress with her small hands. She was still a girl. My lord, just a girl. Her face was sweaty, her hair stuck to her forehead, her eyes wide with fear and pain. And I was there, right beside her, holding her hand tightly and trying not to tremble. Because a mother cannot be afraid when her daughter is in pain. A mother stands tall, even when everything inside her is falling apart. She had no husband, no partner. That boy had grown in her belly from a night no one in the family speaks of, and I don't want to bring that into this memory. Deep down, I always knew I would be the one there when the baby came into the world. There was no one else. It was just her and me. And God, of course, always him. We called the midwife, Dona Noemia, an old lady with calloused hands from so many births, the wisdom of someone who learned from life itself. She arrived in a hurry, scarf tied around her head, an apron stained with herbs, and steady eyes that don't flinch in the face of pain. She said it would be quick, that my girl was young, her body ready, but her heart, oh, her heart was far away. You could see it on her face. She didn't want this moment. She cried, not from pain. It was a deep sadness, the kind only those who've felt abandonment understand. And I was there, sitting in the corner of the bed, holding a basin of hot water, praying softly, "Dear God, give my girl strength and protect this boy who's coming." Time dragged on, as if the whole world were waiting for that baby's cry. The hours felt like days. The smell of blood and sweat filled the small room, mixed with the aroma of boldo leaves that Dona Noemia spread in the air, as if that could drive away the world's pain. And maybe it could. Who knows? Then it happened. In a burst of scream and life, the boy was born. Chubby, red, eyes shut, fists clenched, as if ready to fight the world. He cried loud, as if to say, "I'm here, even if no one wanted me." And in that moment, I knew the way one knows when love hits before there's even a name. I looked at that baby and understood. He was mine too. Not just because he was my daughter's son, but because something in my chest opened like a window I didn't know was closed. My daughter, exhausted, turned her face away. She didn't want to hold him, didn't want to hear his cry. She curled up as if it had nothing to do with her, and I picked that boy up in my arms and felt my whole life change. The warmth of his tiny body against my chest was like a second chance. It was as if God said, "You can still be a mother once more. Take care of this one. He's yours." He stopped crying when he smelled me, laid his little head on my chest, and sighed. "I swear," he sighed. And right then, I ceased to be just a grandmother. I became a mother again. My daughter slept for hours, her body spent. The midwife cleaned everything, helped me wrap him in the cloth diapers I had sewn by hand weeks before. Every stitch of those fabrics I made while praying. I didn't know why I was sewing so much, but now I understood. It was for him. The next day, my daughter woke up changed, looked at the baby from afar with a mix of fear and anger, said she didn't want to hold him, said she didn't know how to be a mother, that it wasn't for her. I embraced her, stayed quiet. It wasn't time for judgment. It was time to shelter. That's how he came into my arms for good, without ceremony, without announcement, without paper. No one signed anything. No one said, "Now he's yours." But he was. The house knew. The walls knew. The neighbors, little by little, began to understand. And I accepted. The first days were like reliving a past I thought was buried. Waking at dawn, feeding him with cow's milk I boiled and cooled just right, changing diapers carefully so he wouldn't get hurt, rocking him with old lullabies my own mother sang to me. And he, my boy, grew strong, looked at me with eyes that knew, as if he understood deep down that he was loved, that he was safe. My daughter, in turn, grew more distant each day, started going out again, putting on makeup, dressing as if everything had gone back to normal. I didn't stop her. I couldn't. A mother's heart isn't made to imprison, only to catch when the world wounds. I knew she still had a long road ahead, and maybe part of the sorrow would be seeing that boy grow up calling me mom, and not her. Months turned into years, and that birth became the marker of my second motherhood, the start of my new beginning. My daughter was always a sweet girl. She had straight hair the color of brewed coffee and big, curious eyes, the kind that asked everything with a glance before opening her mouth. As a child, she loved to play with the dolls I made from fabric scraps and dried corn. She would cradle them, pretend to bathe them, wipe their cheeks with a damp cloth, and play mother. I thought it was beautiful. I believed it meant she would grow up to be responsible and loving. But today, looking back, I understand that playing mother and being a mother live in entirely different worlds. In play, the doll doesn't cry at night, doesn't get sick, doesn't go hungry. In the real world, being a mother means carrying a weight in your body, and a much greater one in your heart. She grew up among clotheslines, the smell of beans simmering on the stove, and the sound of radio soap operas in the kitchen. It was a simple childhood, but full of love. I always did my best to give her what she needed. Sometimes we lacked comfort, but never affection, never kind words. She studied at a small school with packed dirt floors and wide windows. She always came home with neat notebooks and excitement to share what she had learned. She was clever, but so innocent. She believed in the goodness of people with a kind of faith that frightened me. She thought everyone was kind, that no one would ever cause harm. And I, maybe afraid of shattering that sweetness, never told her how cruel the world could be to girls who are too trusting. It was in her last year of school that things changed. She became quieter, more distant. She stopped playing with her nieces, stopped sewing with me on the porch. She spent hours staring out the bedroom window, as if searching for something out there. I noticed, of course. A mother knows when her child changes, even if nothing is said. One day, while I was sewing a patchwork quilt, she sat beside me and stayed silent. Her silence screamed inside me. I stopped stitching and asked, "Are you all right, my child?" She nodded, and before I could ask again, she said, "Mom, I think I'm pregnant." At that moment, the world stopped. Not from surprise, but from pain. She was only 17, still wore the dresses I made her, still got scared during storms. She was my girl, my little one. And suddenly, she was there, teary-eyed, telling me she carried another life inside her. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't blame her. I just held her. A long, tight embrace, the kind that says everything without a single word. After a while, she whispered, "I don't know what to do." And I said, "Neither do I, child, but we'll figure it out together." The following months were heavy. Her belly grew, and with it, so did people's judgment. The neighbors whispered behind doors. Some didn't even try to hide it. At church, we felt the weight of their stares. Some old women called it punishment. Others suggested she go live far away to avoid shame. But shame of what? Loving a daughter? Welcoming a child not yet born? I never understood. And even with my heart tight, I kept my head high, because there was my daughter, still a girl, frightened and fragile, needing me more than ever. She was afraid of giving birth, of course. Afraid of everything. Of being a mother, of failing, of not being enough. She said she didn't know how to hold a baby, how to change a diaper that she'd never manage, and I, patiently, taught her bit by bit. But deep down, I already knew. She wasn't ready, and maybe wouldn't be for a long time. It was as if she were living everything by force, as if motherhood had been handed to her like a role in a play, and someone had said, "Now perform." But she didn't know her lines, didn't recognize the stage, didn't know where to look, and I stood there, behind the curtain, holding it up so she wouldn't fall. When the boy was born, as I already told, she turned her face, didn't want to hold him, stayed silent, curled up, as if none of it concerned her. And just like that, motherhood slipped from her hands into mine. In the days that followed, she wandered the house like a shadow, sometimes sat on the bedroom floor and cried quietly. Other times she laughed at nothing, trying to pretend things were normal. I understood. It was like she had been torn from her youth too fast, like time had skipped too many steps. I never forced her, never made her act like a mother. I didn't think it would help. I gave her space. I cared for the baby, and I cared for her. And slowly, I began to understand that maybe that was my role, to be a mother twice, to my daughter and to my grandson. She tried, a few times, tried to bathe him, tried to rock him to sleep, but the soul wasn't in it. Her eyes lacked light. She did it as a duty, not as a calling, and I didn't judge her. Everyone has their own timing, and she was still just a girl trying to understand life. Today, looking back, I hold no bitterness, only a soft ache in my chest for knowing she never had time to live her youth as she should have. Everything was too fast, too heavy. And even though she failed in some ways, I still see her with love, because being a mother isn't just giving birth, it's loving, even when we fall short. And that I did, for her and for him. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a warm autumn afternoon. The breeze played with the living room curtains, and the radio played an old country tune, one of those songs you only hear when your heart is quiet. I had made coffee using the cloth strainer, the way I always did, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into nothing. That was when I knew, without anyone saying it, without an announcement, without a decision. I just felt it. My grandson was mine. Of course, by blood he always was, but in that moment, it was different. He was mine in a different way. Mine to care for, to guide, to love with the responsibility of someone holding the whole world on her shoulders without letting it fall. My daughter, oh my daughter, so young, still a girl. She was there, physically present, but her mind wandered far. She spent her days in her room, headphones on, magazines scattered across the floor, her dreams bigger than her reality. She said she wanted to be an artist, to travel, to move to the big city, to make her life something lighter. And the baby? Well, the baby cried in the crib, asking for arms, for warmth, for protection. She tried, in the beginning. She'd hold him for a bit, rock him gently, take pictures with that awkward little smile of someone who doesn't grasp the weight of what she carries. But soon, she'd hand him back. "Can you take him for a while, Mom?" And I would. At first, I thought it was just support, natural sharing. Grandmothers help, don't they? But little by little, it became routine, then habit, then silence. There was no specific day when I became his mother. No celebration, no signed paper, no judge's blessing. Time just came and arranged things its own way. One day, I was the one giving him a bath. The next, I was the one waking up at night. I was the one taking him to the health clinic, the one cooking his meals, the one writing down his medicine schedule. I was the one reading stories at bedtime. I was the one worrying when his fever went up. I was the one making promises to St. Anthony when he coughed too much. And she was around, but from afar, present in body, absent in soul, as if motherhood had been a nightmare she hadn't quite woken up from. I never told anyone. Now I'm his mother. Never dared. Out of respect, maybe. Out of fear of hurting her. Out of shame of myself. Because deep down I questioned it too. Wondered if it was right. If I wasn't taking away her chance to grow. To learn with her child in her arms. But instinct spoke louder. When you see a child needing everything, and you have love overflowing in your chest, you just do it. And I did. I remember one Sunday, sun high and shining, a neighbor walking by and saying, "Your boy is getting smarter every day, Mrs. Lourdes." I smiled, thanked her, but didn't correct her. I didn't say, "He's my grandson." I didn't think it mattered. He was mine. In practice, in routine, in devotion. The rest was just words. The strangest part was hearing my daughter calling him my little brother when we had guests, and he, still so small, calling her sis, like in the cartoons. I pretended not to hear. It twisted something inside, but I let it be. I feared the future, feared the day he would grow and ask, feared the day he would say, "Why did you raise me and not my mom?" But that fear was never stronger than the love that made me wake up early, save at the market to buy the softest diapers, wait for him to fall asleep before crying alone in the dark room. It wasn't easy. It was tiring, sometimes lonely. There were days I just wanted to be a grandmother, just to play, sneak candy, hand him back after lunch. But that wasn't my story. My story was to be everything. And I was. I raised him with what I had: willpower, faith, and these worn hands that had already lived so much. I didn't give him everything the world demands, but I gave him everything the heart needs. He never lacked a hug or a hot meal or a blessing at bedtime. He grew up happy, even if he didn't fully understand why. He grew up calling me by name, then Mom, sometimes even Grandma Mom, a word he made up one day. And I'd answer with a smile only those who truly love can understand. I took him in without saying I did, played the role without the title. And you know what? I don't regret it. Because some things don't need to be said to be real. You just feel them. And I did. Oh, my Holy Mother, just remembering it makes my heart ache and warm at the same time. It was an ordinary day. One of those days that pass quietly, without any grand event. Clear skies, a lazy sun slipping through the slats of the kitchen window. I had washed the yard early, like I did every morning, and hung the dish towels on the line. The radio played softly, an old tune by Nelson Gonsalves. The scent of rice simmering with garlic and butter filled the house. He was sitting on the living room floor, playing with plastic toy pans. He wore faded blue shorts and a hand-me-down t-shirt that had already been through other children in the family. His hair was messy, his knee scraped from a fall the day before. Just a child like many. But to me, he was my whole world. I listened to his little voices, his make-believe chatter, his giggles between imaginary spoonfuls. And in the middle of that innocent play, he said, "Mom, where's my juice?" At first, I didn't notice. I answered automatically, the way I always did. "It's in the fridge, sweetheart. Want Mommy to get it for you?" Only afterward did the word hang in the air. "Mom," he had said, "Mom," and I had answered, as if I were. I froze in the kitchen doorway, wooden spoon in hand, my heart jumping like popcorn in the pot. My face flushed, my legs trembled a little. My eyes began to sting without me even understanding why. It was as if everything I had lived until that moment, all the sleepless nights, the fevers, the colic, the baths, the lullabies, had suddenly been given a name. Mom. No one had taught him that. No one told him to call me that. Not my daughter, not me. It was natural, spontaneous, from his little heart. A pure, true gesture. A child knows who comforts, who embraces in fear, who shows up at the door after a nightmare. A child knows who is a lap and who is a presence. He knew. At the time, he must have been around 3 years old, or something close to it. He was speaking more clearly, recognizing faces, names, affections. And even though he called my daughter Sissy, as he did sometimes, the stronger bond was with me. I was the one there, day and night. Mine was the face he saw when he woke up and when he went to bed. I stood there, watching him drink his juice from a plastic cup, innocent, unaware of the weight of that word. He went on playing, peaceful, as if nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had changed. I sat in the kitchen chair, still holding the spoon. The rice burned a little, but I didn't care. I cried quietly, eyes closed. It wasn't sadness. No, it was gratitude, wonder, a beautiful kind of joy that hurt, because in that moment, he gave me a name. A name I never asked for, but that he offered with his heart. A name that sealed everything I had been in silence. I remember that night, after he fell asleep, I sat beside his crib for a long while. I watched his gentle breathing, the way he held his little cloth while he slept. I ran my hand through his soft hair and whispered, "If that's what your heart feels, my child, then that's what I am." But deep down, I knew the world outside was more complicated. That one day he would learn the truths of life, the proper names, the correct titles, that he'd ask why his sister was his mother and his mother was his grandmother. I knew that day would come, but that night, that room was my entire universe. Just him and me, and that word, Mom. In the days that followed, he went back and forth. Sometimes he called me Grandma, sometimes Mom. I never corrected him, never pushed him one way or the other. I let his love call me however it wanted. And maybe that's why, because there was no pressure, no demand, our bond grew even stronger. My daughter, for her part, didn't react. She said nothing. I think she understood too, or maybe pretended not to hear, but something in her must have felt it. Those words from him were like arrows pointing straight to where his heart found shelter. Over time, he would call me both ways. Mom, when he was needy, tender. Grandma, when he wanted to ask for something sweetly. But every time he looked at me with that trusting, safe gaze, I knew that no matter the word, the feeling was the same. He saw me as his safe harbor. And me? I accepted that role with a full heart. I never sought recognition. I didn't need a mother's diploma. That single call was enough. That little word slipping from his mouth as if it had always belonged to me. The first time he called me Mom was simple, unplanned, but it was also the greatest declaration of all. Because true love doesn't need an audience. It just needs presence. And presence, I gave. I gave it all. Well, I thought I had already lived enough, that I had gone through all the stages life offers a regular woman, daughter, wife, mother. And when my daughter had her baby, I thought it would be the next natural step, to become a grandmother. One of those who spoils the child, shows up with a slice of cake in the afternoon, holds them for a while and hands them back when the crying gets too strong. But life had other plans for me, and suddenly, there I was, starting all over again. Diapers, bottles, midnight fevers, health clinic visits, tiny vaccine shots, unexplained cries, all those things I had left behind decades before. The difference was that the first time, I had youth in my body. Now, only love remained, and a tired body. It wasn't easy. There were days when my back hurt so much, it felt like it would break just from getting out of bed. There were nights when the exhaustion reached the bone, and still I got up, warmed water on the stove, gave a lukewarm bath, and sang softly that same lullaby I once sang to my daughter. Sleep, baby, or the boogeyman will get you. It was strange, like a cycle starting again without asking permission. While my friends of the same age talked about traveling or watching the grandkids from time to time, I talked about colic, diaper rash ointment, pumpkin puree. Sometimes I felt out of place, other times invisible. But what hurt the most was the loneliness. Because it wasn't just about taking care of a baby. It was carrying the silence of my daughter on my back, who spent her days inside her room, as if her motherhood had been erased. And it was also hearing the neighbors whisper, thinking he was my son, a late child, a secret mistake. I never explained. I never thought it was worth it. Between one diaper and another, between a chamomile tea and a kiss on a sweaty forehead, I became a mother again, without ever ceasing to be a grandmother. And you know what else I remember? The advice. Because when you raise a child again, everyone thinks they have the right to give opinions. There was the family friend who said chamomile tea was outdated, the nephew who came with new ideas he saw on television, the neighbor across the street who believed I should let him cry to strengthen his lungs, and even my own daughter from time to time would chime in, even though she was almost always absent. Don't hold him so much, Mom. He'll get spoiled. Oh, if only she knew the value of being held. I pretended to listen to a lot. Some things went in one ear and out the other. Deep down, I knew. You raise a child the way you know, the way you feel, the way you can, and I raised him with my soul. It may not have been the modern way, but it was true. I remember once he had a fever that scared me. His little body was burning like fire. I spent the whole night with him in my arms, wetting his forehead with a damp cloth, praying softly. I prayed to Saint Expedite, to Our Lady of Aparecida, even to Saint Roch. I don't even know if he looks after children, but I prayed anyway. The next morning, I took him to the health center, bent with sleep and exhaustion. The doctor asked if he was my son. Without thinking, I said, "Yes, doctor." Only later on the way home did I realize I had spoken from the heart. It wasn't a lie. It was feeling. The days blurred together. Sometimes I forgot his age. Other times, I forgot mine. I felt like a mother again, but with the wisdom only time brings. I knew time passed quickly, that today's cries would become tomorrow's laughter, that exhaustion fades, but love remains. There were nights I sat at the edge of the bed and wondered, will I make it to the end? Will I see him grow, graduate, have a life of his own? And at the same time, I thought, even if I don't, it's already worth it. Because every laugh, every step, every new word he learned made the world feel lighter. As if God whispered to me, you are not here for nothing. I had moments of anger too. Anger at my daughter for stepping away, anger at myself for letting it happen, but never at him. He was innocent, he was pure, he was love in its smallest and most complete form. Between diapers and advice, I learned to silence the world to hear my heart, and my heart said, keep going, and I did. Ah, my daughter. She was so beautiful, so full of life. She had that sparkle in her eyes of someone who didn't yet understand the weight of choices, but already wanted to run the world. She dreamed too big for her age, said she would be an actress, a model, a singer, sometimes all at once, in the same sentence, with the conviction only youth carries. When she got pregnant, I saw that sparkle dim a little, not disappear completely, but it faded. Her belly grew, the looks from people changed, the invitations from friends dwindled. And inside, she became a frightened young woman, trying to look strong. I didn't judge her. She was my daughter, my little girl, and like every girl who becomes a mother too soon, she still wanted to be a daughter. After the baby was born, she tried, truly tried, in the beginning. She'd hold him, make faces, kiss his forehead, take pictures with that old camera that still used film. But when the crying got loud, she'd shrink, call for me. Sometimes she didn't even call. She'd just stretch out her arms and hand him over, with a look that mixed guilt, relief, and fear. With time, she began creating a kind of distance, subtle, quiet. She spent more time locked in her room, playing loud music, writing in her diary, calling her friends. She started going out on weekends again, said she needed to clear her mind. I didn't stop her. I just asked her to let me know where she was going. But what really hurt was watching her try to hide in the role of sister. She didn't say it outright, but she implied it. She introduced the boy as my little brother, even among people who knew the truth. At first, I thought it was just habit. Later, I realized it was defense. Maybe she didn't know how to handle the guilt. Maybe she thought pretending he was her brother would be easier than facing her responsibility. Maybe she just wasn't ready to see herself in that role. And the oddest thing, he called her Sissy. That's how she referred to herself around him. Sissy's gonna buy you candy. Sissy's taking you to the playground. And he learned, repeated it with that sweet little voice children have, not knowing what it truly meant. I confess, sometimes it pinched my heart. I watched the two of them and felt something out of place. Her pretending to be a sister, him believing he had one, and me in the middle, holding everything together with hands too worn by life. There was one day, oh, that day is engraved in me. We were at the little park. She had decided to come with us, which was rare. She seemed lighter that day, wore a floral skirt, and had braided her hair, sat on the bench with me while he chased pigeons. Suddenly, a woman came near, the chatty type who loves to strike up conversations without asking. Is that your grandson? She asked me. Before I could answer, my daughter jumped in. He's my little brother. The woman looked confused, glanced back and forth between them, then smiled awkwardly. What a beautiful family, she said, and walked away. We stayed silent for a long time. She didn't look at me, and I said nothing, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew any word at that moment would be a blade, and I, who had already patched up so many cuts in life, didn't want to open another. I understood. I understood she was trying to cope in the only way she could, that her youth still wanted to run, to dance, to live without obligation, that her world was another, and maybe being a mother so soon felt like wearing shoes too small. It pinched, hurt, didn't match the dress she had dreamed of wearing, but at the same time, it hurt, because I watched the boy grow up not knowing the truth, seeing his mother as a sister, calling his grandmother Mom, and that would become a knot later. I knew. I felt it, but it wasn't time. Not yet. She tried to be a sister, tried to give love the way she could. Sometimes it was just a quick kiss, candy from the bakery, a movie trip on weekends. But it was something. It was little, but it was hers. And me, even with a divided heart, never pushed her away, never told her she was wrong, because I knew she was already carrying too much inside. I just let her be, the way she could, in the way she was able to be present. Between silences, forced smiles, and shy hugs, she found a way to exist, not as a mother, not as a sister, but as a girl trying to be a grown-up in a world that pushed her too soon. And I kept being a full-time mother, but inside, I was still her mother too. And like every mother, I waited. I waited for the day she might return whole again. There's no way to prepare for this. You may have raised 10 children, read all the books, heard every piece of advice in the world, but when a child looks into your eyes and asks what their heart doesn't yet understand, it feels like the ground disappears beneath you. He was still little, could barely tie his shoes, but was already connecting the loose threads that life had scattered along the way. Children are like that, aren't they? They seem distracted, but they see everything, hear everything, feel everything. The first question came on a Sunday morning. I was washing the dishes, and he was sitting on the kitchen floor, drawing in a notebook with crayons. He was drawing the family, he said, showed me a little figure with white hair and said, "That's you, Mom." I smiled, the way I always did when he called me that. But before I could praise the drawing, he pointed to another figure, a smaller one with a colorful dress. "And that's Sissy. I mean, my sister. But why doesn't she ever take me to school?" My hand froze inside the sink. The bubbles covered my fingers, and my heart rose to my throat. I took a deep breath and sat down next to him. "Well, Sissy studies too, sweetheart. Sometimes she has early classes. Sometimes she has other things to do." He looked at me with that look only a child has, a mix of innocence and wisdom. "But all the other moms take their kids, Grandma." Right there, in that moment, he called me Grandma. It was as if he had felt the confusion, as if, without fully understanding, his heart was trying to make sense of something that had only been patched together. Those little questions started showing up more and more. Why don't I have a dad? Why does Sissy live with us but never scold me? Why does my school form say you're my mom, but you're my grandma? Every time he asked, it felt like a needle. Not because of malice, there wasn't any, but because I knew that any answer might plant hurt where only love should grow. I did what I could. I answered with kindness, with sweetness, with tears in my eyes, hidden behind a smile. "Your dad left before you were born, sweetheart. Sissy is still very young. That's why Grandma helps more. I am your grandma, yes, but I'm also your heart's mom." And he accepted it, because children love more than they question. But I could see in his eyes he was trying to piece together a puzzle no one had explained how to solve. I remember once, on a Saturday afternoon, we were watching cartoons on TV. He turned to me suddenly, without warning, and said, "Grandma, do you think I was made wrong, my lord?" In that moment, I felt the world stop. I held him tight in my arms, hugged him close, and said, my voice shaking, "Don't ever say that, my love. You were made with love, so much love, and you were made to shine. You are perfect." He looked at me seriously, as if trying to believe it, and I prayed, deep inside, that those words would stick to his heart forever, like a blessing. It wasn't easy. Each question from him was like a mirror, forcing me to look again at everything. My daughter's absence as a mother, the silence we turned into routine, the lie disguised as protection. And still, I chose to go on, because my love for him was greater than my fear of the truth. I knew time was relentless, that one day he wouldn't accept half answers anymore, that the hour of raw truth would come. But as long as he was little, I tried to shelter him, not deceive, but protect, until the world felt a little softer. Because, look, it's not that I wanted to hide anything, but how do you explain to a child that his mother is his sister? How do you tell a boy he was raised between love and silence, between truth and omission? So I spoke with affection, with care, with faith. And I prayed. I prayed a lot. I prayed that when he grew up, he would understand. And more than that he would forgive me. The form was filled out in my handwriting. Blue pen, careful letters, trembling a little from nerves. The school paper had neatly lined sections, and at the top it read, "Legal Guardian of the Child." I took a deep breath before writing my name. Mother's name, Lourdes Maria da Silva. Mother's age, 62. Profession, housekeeper. Relationship to the child, mother. A lie? Perhaps. But also, truth. Yes, I was his mother. Not as written on his birth certificate, but as written in the heart and in life. I was the one who held his hand during the first fevers. I taught him how to use a fork, to say good morning, to tie his shoes. I told him bedtime stories, baked cake on Sundays, saved baby teeth in a jar, the mother of the everyday. At school, no one asked much. The secretary knew me from my daughter's time and pretended not to see the difference. I brought the documents, signed everything, attended parent meetings. My daughter's name, his real mother, was marked not listed on a few forms. I knew that one day it might come back to me, but in that moment, it was the best I could do for him, give him normality. The first day I took him to school was unforgettable. He wore a brand new backpack, shiny black shoes, his hair slicked with gel. He was so happy. He talked nonstop, asked if he'd learned to write his own name that very day. Inside, I trembled. I was so afraid someone would ask something he couldn't answer, that he would say one thing and I another. But no, he called me Mom, so naturally that no one ever questioned it. The other children called, "Bye, Miss." He said, "Bye, Mom." And I answered, with that smile that hides everything you don't say. At the parent meetings, I sat with the other mothers. Some were much younger than me. They looked at me with a mix of respect and curiosity, but no one asked directly. Once, a mother of another child said, "Your boy is so polite and so affectionate with you. You can tell he was raised with love." I thanked her, swallowing the emotion. His teacher was a sweet woman named Teresa. In the first school term, she called me aside after class. She said he was doing very well, that he was participative, curious, sensitive. Then she asked, "He doesn't talk much about his family. Do you live alone with him?" I paused for a second. I didn't lie. But I didn't tell everything either. "It's me, him, and his sister. But I've taken care of him since he was born." She nodded, as if she understood more than she said, and never asked again. School became the one place where everything felt right, where he was just like the others, where no one pointed, where he had a lunchbox like everyone else, drawings on the wall, a message notebook, where he was just a boy like so many. But sometimes, I'd wonder if he would ever notice. If, amid all those papers and names, he would suspect something was out of place. When he brought home a note that read, "Mom, please sign," I signed it. And he would say, "I already gave it to Mom." I never corrected him, never said, "That's Grandma," because to him, I was. Once, there was a Mother's Day performance. I sat in the makeshift audience of bedsheets and iron chairs. The children sang, handed out glittery cards with hearts. He came to me with a crumpled card and a colorful drawing. "Happy Mother's Day, Grandma." He said Grandma this time, maybe because the others did, but he hugged me so tightly, so warmly that I knew. The word was just detail, the feeling. That was real. I came home holding the card on my lap, fighting tears, not because he called me Grandma, but because deep down, he was starting to notice the difference. The world outside teaches labels, and too soon, he would have to learn that not all love fits inside the usual boxes. School was the place where I had to be brave, where I took on a role that wasn't mine, because no one else wanted to, where I pretended things were normal to give him a little peace. And would I do it all again? I would, 100 times, 1,000 times, because sitting at those little wooden desks, between crayons and homework, my boy was happy. And if he was happy, whether he called me Mom or Grandma, I truly was his mother. Childhood has this beautiful power of accepting the world as it is, without asking for much explanation. But adolescence is made of sharp questions, restless silence, eyes that start to see behind the curtain. It was during that phase, when his voice deepened and his body stretched suddenly, that he began to change the way he looked at me. It was no longer the wide-eyed gaze of a child who thinks Grandma is magic. It was deeper, more serious. He watched more, listened to conversations carefully, collected crumbs of truth that time had left behind. It all started subtly. One afternoon we were having lunch. I had made chicken with okra just the way he liked, and out of nowhere he asked, "Grandma, how old were you when you had me?" I nearly choked on the rice. I forced a smile and said, "Oh, sweetie, I was already grown." "Why?" He shrugged, pretending not to care. "I don't know. It's just that Julia's mom is 32, and she had Julia when she was 20. If it were the same, you would have had me at over 40. And then he went quiet, but I felt it. The thought was taking shape. Then came the silences, the unspoken questions, hovering in the air like clouds before rain. He began to pull away a little. Not in affection, he was always respectful, but in trust, as if he were testing the truth with his own hands. My daughter, who had never fully stepped into the role of mother, was more distant than ever during that time. She spent weeks away, saying she was working, taking courses, living her life. When she showed up, it was a whirlwind. He didn't even call her Sissy anymore. He used her name, and when she tried to get close, he answered coldly. Once, I overheard him speaking to a friend at the gate. "Yeah, I live with my grandma. My mom, I don't know." That sentence pierced me. Not for me, but for him. Because I saw that he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. He started asking more direct questions. "Grandma, why don't I have baby pictures with my mom? Why has no one told me who my father was? Why do my documents have one name, but someone else is raising me?" I tried to answer carefully, but I felt it wasn't enough anymore. Adolescence is harsh on those raised in blurred stories. They want clarity. They want names, dates, explanations. They want to know who they are, where they came from, why life turned out this way. Then one day, a day I'll never forget, we were washing the front sidewalk together, like we always did on Saturdays. He was nearly my height, wearing his flip-flops backwards, like always. And suddenly, he dropped the hose and said, "I know you're my grandma, but why did you have to raise me like you were my mom?" I froze, soaked from head to toe, with a heart even more soaked. I took a deep breath, sat on the porch step, and asked him to sit with me. I held his hands, already bigger than mine, and said calmly, "Because no one else could, because you needed me, and because I loved you more than I feared the truth." He said nothing, but his eyes sparkled. We sat there a while in silence as water ran down the sidewalk and the sky began to change color. His adolescence was the hardest time for me, because it was the time of awakening, the time when questions find voice and silence demands answers. But it was also the time he began to understand. And even without words, I felt he was grateful, not in speech, but in gestures, in the coffee he made for me, in the "Don't worry, Grandma, I've got it," in the way he covered me when I fell asleep on the couch. It was during that time that he stopped calling me Mom. He went back to saying Grandma, but with a deeper tone, more full of meaning, as if to say, "I know who you are, and I love you for it." And that was enough, the truth. We think we can hold it in, stitch it shut with threads of silence, but truth is not cloth, it's fire, and sooner or later, it burns. I always knew the day would come, the day when everything I had hidden out of love would come to light. Still, deep down, I wished it would happen differently, that it would be said gently, with care, with comfort, that he'd be a grown man by then. Or, at the very least, that it would be me who told him. But it wasn't. It was a regular day, a heavy afternoon, no breeze, the kind of day when even the air feels thick. My daughter was home, rare, but it happened. He had just come back from school, already irritated, a mix of teenage heat and bubbling questions. They started with a silly argument, something about chores, tone of voice, teenage mood. I was in the backyard, hanging clothes, when I heard the tone shift. Peeking through the window, I saw his eyes wet, his face clenched, and he said, "You're never here. You don't care. You act like I don't matter." She, already impatient, crossed her arms, and then, like someone firing a gun without aiming, she snapped, "I care more than you think. I'm your mother, not your sister. Or did you forget?" Time stopped. I felt it. Standing there with a wet towel in my hand, I felt the floor give way beneath our feet. The whole world went quiet. The house seemed to hold its breath. He looked at her as if he had misheard, but she didn't take it back. She just stood there, frozen, realizing too late what she had said. He turned his eyes to me. I was now standing in the kitchen doorway. The towel slipped from my hands. He didn't say anything, but his look, that look was everything. Anger, hurt, confusion, betrayal. He ran out the door. I didn't wait, slipped into my sandals and followed. Caught up with him at the edge of the sidewalk, his hands shaking, his eyes burning red. I tried to speak, but he pulled back. "You knew," he said, voice breaking. "You knew, and never told me." "I wanted to protect you," I replied, my throat tight. "Protect me from what?" from who I am. I couldn't say anything else. I just cried, and he cried too. But even through tears, he pulled away, said he needed time, that he wanted to think. They were the longest days of my life. The house fell into silence. Food lost its taste. The radio stayed off. The rocking chair stood still. I wandered from room to room like a lost soul, replayed everything, every choice, every silence, every sweet lie I had told to shield him from the world. My daughter locked herself in her room, ashamed. She didn't apologize, didn't explain. I think she didn't know how. He spent a few days away, at a friend's house. I knew where he was, but I didn't go after him. I respected it. Some things we must go through alone. When he came back, he went straight to his room, didn't say goodnight, didn't take off his shoes. But later that night, I heard him crying quietly. And I cried too, outside the door, leaning against the wall. The truth slipped out that day. Not the right way, not the way I hoped, but it slipped. And with it, the child he had been was gone. In his place stood a teenager with brand new scars, and in me, a broken heart, but still full of love. Did it hurt? It hurt deeply, but I knew this moment had to come. And even though I wasn't ready, even with my soul in pieces, I gave thanks, because now everything was on the table, and love that never had to hide again. What came after that day was not shouting. It was not anger, not an argument. It was worse. It was silence, a heavy silence, thick and still, that settled over the house like a damp blanket. Everything around kept moving. The kettle still whistled, the radio still played, the wall clock still ticked, but inside, everything was too quiet. He wouldn't look at me, walked past me like I was glass, answered with a word, if anything. Sometimes pretended to sleep just to avoid seeing me in the living room. Other times, he left before breakfast, came back after dinner, eyes downcast, soul elsewhere. It was the first time since he was born that I felt I had lost him. It wasn't tantrum. It wasn't teenage rebellion. It was pain, a quiet, deep pain you can feel in the air, like the smell of rain before the storm. He was hurt, and I was the wound, even though I hadn't said the words, "I am your mother." It felt like the blow had come from me, because I knew. I always knew, and I had hidden it, and no matter how much love had wrapped that truth, he didn't see it that way. He saw betrayal. My daughter, his mother by blood, barely showed up after that. Stayed locked in her room at first, then left again, as she always did. Didn't say sorry. Maybe she didn't know how, or maybe she felt it was too late. And I was left with the weight. Guilt followed me through the house, sat beside me in the rocking chair, slept in the hammock. It mixed with the smell of coffee, the hum of the fan, the memories of a time when everything felt simpler. I found myself staring at old photos, me, younger, holding him in my arms, smiling. Him asleep on my chest, hair messy, feet dusty. Little notes he wrote in crooked letters. "I love you, Grandma. You're my heart, Mom." All that felt like a life ago. Now, he walked past me. The boy who once left love notes now left silence, and silence. Silence speaks loud. I remember one night I cooked his favorite meal, loose rice, beef stew, banana farofa, set his plate on the table, napkin folded, a glass of cashew juice. I waited until the food was cold. He never came. I went to his room. The light was off. I knocked lightly. Nothing. Pressed my ear to the door. All I heard was the fan turning, like time spinning inside me. I didn't insist. The storm was his, and I had to let it rain. It was a hard time. I slept little, ate even less. I felt old all of a sudden, not because of my age, but because of the absence of joy. And that's when I realized silence can be more violent than any fight. Because in silence, you don't know where to step. You try to guess, and it's exhausting. But even in silence, he was still my boy. I noticed when he left the wet towel on the sofa, when he took the last bread roll and left money on the table, when he folded my blanket and placed it gently over the arm of the chair. He didn't speak, but he still cared. It was his way of saying, "I still love you, but I'm trying to understand." And I respected that. I waited. The storm needed to pass in its own time. Then one day, I noticed a change, small, but there. He left a note on the table, just one sentence, "Made the coffee." I read it and cried, not because of the coffee, but because it was the first gesture after days of emptiness. It was the beginning of a bridge, and little by little, the silence began to shift. It was no longer a wall. It became a pause, a breath between what we had been and what we might become again. The pain was still there. But love never left. There are conversations we rehearse our whole life. We run them through our minds 1,000 times. Imagine how they'll begin, where we'll sit, the tone of voice, even the pauses we'll leave between words. I rehearsed this conversation for years. On the days he fell asleep in my lap as a child, I would think, one day, he's going to want to know everything. When he was a teenager and looked at me with suspicion, I'd tell myself, the time is coming. But I never knew how to start. In the end, it was him who did. It was on a quiet afternoon, after a long rain. The street still smelled of wet earth. I was on the porch, mending a torn bedsheet, when he came out, already a grown man, with a faint beard and broad shoulders of someone who's carried life on his back. He sat beside me, without rush. We stayed silent for a while. Just the sound of the wind rustling the mango tree leaves and the smell of fresh coffee I had brewed not long before. Then he spoke quietly, as if not to scare the moment. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" I lifted my eyes and just nodded silently. He adjusted his hands on his lap and looked straight ahead. He didn't look at me, maybe because, when the pain is deep, we can only look toward the horizon. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I didn't have to ask what. I knew. I sighed, let go of the fabric, and spoke the truest thing I carried in my chest. Because loving you was always more urgent than explaining everything. He bit his lip. His eyes welled up, but he didn't look away. He stayed strong. I spent a long time feeling like I had been lied to. That hurt, but it was true. Deceit isn't only born from lies, it grows in silence too. "And you were," I said, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear of losing you. Fear that you wouldn't understand. That you'd be hurt by me, as if everything I did had been in vain. He took a deep breath, fidgeted with his fingers. "But I understand now. It took me a while, but I do. You were the only one who never left, the only one who was always there. I just wish I had heard it from you." My eyes filled with tears. I tried to speak, but my voice broke. I took his hand, now big, strong, calloused, and said, as if speaking to the little boy he once was, "Forgive me for keeping so much inside. But what I never hid was my love. Every pot of beans I cooked, every night I stayed awake, every quiet seam I stitched, was my way of saying, 'I am your mother too.'" He bowed his head, cried a little, and hugged me. It was a long hug, from someone who doesn't want to hide anymore, from someone who understands, accepts, and above all, is grateful. There, on that simple porch, with the mango tree swaying in the distance and the smell of coffee still in the air, the thing we'd spent years building finally happened. The truth, spoken with love. And when he looked at me again, smiled gently, and said, "You've always been my mother. I just wanted to know why." I knew then we were finally at peace. Forgiveness. Oh, forgiveness is a stubborn thing. It doesn't bloom from an apology, nor does it rise from a hug. It comes when it wants. Sometimes it takes so long we think it'll never arrive, but when it does, we feel it, and we cry. After that conversation on the porch, the one that took years to happen, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the hammock, listening to the sound of crickets and memories. His face kept coming back in my mind, the way he spoke, the way he listened, and most of all, the way he looked at me in the end, as if to say, "I understand, Grandma. I truly do. But understanding is not the same as forgiving." And I knew that. The wound had gone too deep, not from cruelty, he knew that, but from omission. And omission, even when stitched with love, is still a cut. In the days that followed, everything felt lighter. He went back to calling me Grandma again, but this time with warmth. He helped with whatever he could. He listened more closely. We didn't speak much about the past, but we didn't avoid it either. It was as if a room that had always been closed finally had a window opened. And time, as it always does, began to heal. I remember one day in particular. It was winter. I had a cold, feverish shivering under 3 blankets. He came into the room quietly, brought me tea with lemon and honey, and laid a cool cloth on my forehead. He sat there, at the edge of the bed, saying nothing, just keeping me company, just like I had done for him so many times before. In that moment, I understood. This is forgiveness. It wasn't spoken aloud. It was spoken through his care. Forgiveness didn't come in the form of a grand apology. It came slowly, in the way he began to look at me again, in the coffee he brewed without being asked, in the note he left on the fridge that read, "Get those cookies you like," in the way he fluffed the pillow behind my back, in the kind of silence that only exists between people who've forgiven each other, even without saying the word. One of those nights, he whispered, "You gave me more love than many mothers out there." And that washed me clean from the inside. That was forgiveness, not a harsh, demanding, bitter kind of forgiveness, but a gentle, quiet one, full of recognition. And the most beautiful thing was that with time, he forgave himself too. Yes, because sometimes the pain we carry isn't just for others. It's for having believed in something false, for having felt fooled, abandoned, misled. I saw it in his eyes. He carried that too. And it was beautiful to see when he began to let it go. His forgiveness freed me, but his forgiveness of himself, that was what healed everything. Today, when I look at him, already a man, already whole, I see not just the boy I raised, but the person he chose to become. And I know, with all the certainty in the world, that it was all worth it, because love survived, and forgiveness came. Maybe late, maybe slow, but it came, and it stayed. Life really is a circle, isn't it? We start out taking care, and one day, before we know it, we're the ones being cared for. Today, he's the one who calls me early every morning to ask if I slept well. He's the one who stops by on Sunday afternoons, shirt tucked in, hair combed, with that same boyish smile that never left his face. He arrives carrying a bag of fresh rolls and some fruit he found at the market that reminded him of me. "I brought silver bananas, Grandma. The kind you say won't upset your stomach." And I smile with my soul, because every small gesture of care he gives me is an echo of what I planted long ago. I remember the time when I packed his lunchbox, when I'd slip little notes into his notebook that said, "Have a good day at school," when I waited for him to come home, ready with juice and buttered bread. And now, he's the one who reminds me to take my medicine, who changes the porch light bulb without me asking, who notices when I've gone too quiet and just sits with me, in silence, just to be there. He says he can't come for lunch every day because work takes too much of his time. But on Sundays, he comes, and not out of duty. He comes because he wants to. He brings dessert, compliments my cooking, and tells me about his life with a kind of respect that makes me forget any sorrow. Sometimes he drapes his arm over the back of my chair and says, "You have no idea how grateful I am for everything." And I tell him there's no need to thank me, because love doesn't ask for anything in return. But he thanks me anyway, because that's who he is, because he grew up knowing the value of simple things, and because even if time gave us scars, what remains is love. And this love now sustains me. There are days he stops by in a rush, just to drop off a bag of bread and kiss my forehead. Other days, he sits with me, makes coffee, and listens to me tell the same stories for the 1,000th time, and never complains. Pretends it's the first time, laughs in the same spots, asks questions like it's all brand new. And I realize he takes care of me not just with his body, but with his patience, with his presence, with his time. I no longer have the energy I once had. My legs ache, my breath shortens, my memory slips now and then. But the moment I hear him open the gate, everything feels light again. When he leaves, he hugs me tight and says, "Be well, my grandma, my mother too." And then my chest both tightens and softens. Because in those two words, grandma and mother, lives our whole story. Today, he takes care of me, and he does it beautifully. 16. If I had to do it all over again, if I had to go back to that day he was born, so tiny, wrapped in a blue blanket, eyes closed as if not quite ready to wake up to the world, I would do everything the same. I would take him in my arms, even with hands already worn by time, even with knees that creaked with every step, even with the tiredness hidden behind my eyes. I would hold him, and I would care for him. If I had to retrace those steps, changing diapers in the middle of the night, mashing vegetables with a fork, singing lullabies between tears, I would repeat each gesture, each moment, each silence too, because now, looking at it all from afar, I understand. Love that is given is never lost. Sometimes I ask myself if I failed my daughter, if I should have insisted more that she take her role, if I was too much of a mother to my grandson, and not enough to my daughter. But life doesn't come with a manual, and in that moment, I did what my heart told me, and my heart told me to protect. I chose to care. I chose to be shelter, shield, and root. I chose to be present, even if it meant twice the weight. And yes, I paid the price. I spent sleepless nights, swallowed bitter comments, endured quiet judgment. I stayed silent when needed, hid when I had to. But not once did I stop loving or fighting. If I had to relive that afternoon when he called me Mom for the first time, oh, I would do it exactly the same. I would let that word pierce me, like an arrow and like a bloom, because it was then that I understood. Motherhood doesn't depend on blood, but on devotion. If I had to go through all that silence again, through the pain in his eyes when he found out, through the days he wouldn't look at me, I would endure it, because today he looks at me, and he looks with love and with truth. And if life offered me the chance to live a different story, I would say, no, thank you. This one was mine, with its folds, its aches, its tenderness, with the pot on the stove, the rocking chair, the fresh coffee on the table, with the smell of laundry on the line, the sound of his laughter running through the yard, with the scoldings I gave, the hugs I saved, the kisses I gave, without asking for any in return. I was a grandmother, but I was also a mother. And I was happy that way. Today, he calls me every day, calls me Grandma with affection and Mom with pride. And when he says, I love you before hanging up, I know nothing was in vain. So yes, if I had to do it all over again, I would, with the same mistakes, with the same fears, but with the same love. Because love, true love, cannot be explained, only lived. And I lived it. If you liked Grandma's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can hear more stories like this and share them with other people who might be inspired by this story of overcoming. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a similar situation? How did you react? A kiss on the heart from all of you, and until the next story.